Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christy Mora, and welcome to the Generosity Workshop series. I am part of the team here at Generis, where every day we are inspired to help leaders like you move the needle on generosity. In today's workshop, we will be talking about communicating to all levels of givers. And, communicating to givers requires understanding the different types of givers. So in today's session, Julie Bullock and Jim Shepard will be exploring how leaders can avoid the one-size-fits-all approach. So before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping up front here. This workshop will be recorded, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with you in a follow-up email that will go out tomorrow. After Julie and Jim wrap up the presentation that they've prepared, we'll move into a Q&A session. So throughout this workshop, feel free to drop your questions in that Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. And the chat is available, so you can go ahead and introduce yourselves and let us know where you're joining in from. So that's enough of me. Jim, Julie, I'll let you guys take it over from here.
Thank you so much, Christy. I really appreciate that. And I'm excited to be here today for this today's version of our Generosity Workshop series, because as we were kind of planning through and thinking about all of this, we knew we had to have at least one session where we had our own Julie Bullock in here leading something. And then when we talked about it, it was really clear to us that there is one thing that she can speak to exceedingly well, that actually when she does it in our room with all of our consultants, they take lots of notes. So if they take lots of notes, there's a really good chance that it's going to be meaningful to you. Christy alluded to, just kind of refuting the idea of one size fits all. That's the way churches tend to do it. And we're going to approach this in a way that I think is going to surprise you today. If you came here looking for ways to stratify your email list, we're going to disappoint you today, because we're not going to do that. We're going to go at this from a whole different angle, really the angle that means the most, and that is the heart behind what happens to these givers. And so with that said, I'm going to jump out of the way here, and I'm going to bring Julie in. Julie, it's so good to have you today. Thank you for agreeing to join us, and looking forward to kind of where you want to take us. So I think you've got some slides here, and I'll dive in every now and then and just kind of probe a little bit, some things that I know that you would say that may not be in your slide or presentation. But let's go ahead and get started. Let's put this content out there for everybody. I'm excited about it, and I hope it's going to be meaningful for you. So Julie, take it away.
Jim, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for being here. Jim and I are going on 13 years doing this together. Jim's been doing it a little longer than I have. I won't say how many years. I'll let Jim say that, but it's been fun to partner together going on our 13th year. And Christy, thanks again for getting this set up. And friends that we can't see your faces, but we see you in the chat bar, it's so great to have you. And we're really great to be able to hopefully add some value today. So I'm going to screen share presentation here. And so here is, we're going to get rolling here. Let me do a full screen on this. Okay. So first, we just love to start off with a passage of scripture, probably familiar to most of you. And this is really, Jim referenced this. We want to begin with talking about the heart behind communicating to givers. And we chose this passage from Colossians, the book of Colossians, chapter 3. And I'm just going to read it out loud to us. If you want to read it out loud where you are, please feel free. But I'm going to read it out loud as we begin our time together today. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, you were called to peace. And be thankful. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, and psalms from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Jim referenced this, but sometimes when we're talking about this topic of giving and generosity, we think a lot about strategy and tactics, and so many of those things are very wise. And we'll even talk about some of those things today. But the heart behind those things truly is, what does it look like to look like Christ as we give? What does the Bible say about giving? How are we giving in a way that honors God and leads more people to him? And so even when we're thinking about some of these strategies and tactics, we want that to be founded in this fact of us teaching and admonishing one another with wisdom through psalms, hymns, spiritual songs, singing to God with gratitude, and doing everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Jim, anything you want to add on that as we kind of start in? We've got 3 big points for you today.
Yeah, I love that you started there, Julie, because I think it is really our whole point here is that if we don't deal with givers' hearts, we're really missing the point. More communication with them, as wise and as helpful as that might be as a part of a strategy, is not the lead to the strategy. We want to make sure that we've helped them understand that, this is going to come from inside of you. Tim Keller says it this way in a video that I think a lot of people have seen. If you haven't, it's in his generous giving video. He said, when I used to do counseling, nobody ever came to me and thought that they had a problem with greed. Not one person over all the years. And they came and confessed some pretty strange stuff, but never that. And then if we look over here and see what Jesus did, and he talks 20 to 30 times more about giving and the heart behind giving than any other kinds of behavior. And there's a really good chance that we need to pay attention to that, right? Nobody thinks it's them, but there really is a heart. And Jesus wanted us to pay attention to that. And I think that verse from Colossians just so illuminates that for us. So take us on a journey. I love this slide. Giving is a journey. Open that one up for us.
Perfect. So I wish I could interact with all of you, see your faces, but I'm going to ask you to put in the chat anyone's best guess at what these numbers represent, these numbers in these statements, and particularly what do the different numbers associated with the statements represent. So little chat bar interaction here. Any guesses as to what these statements represent?
I'm assuming I don't get to participate here. Is that right?
You do not get to participate. And I can't, I actually, let me see here. I don't know if I can, I'm trying to figure out how I can see the chat bar. This is where there we go. Okay. I can now see the chat bar. Okay. So let's see here. Any guesses yet that anyone has? I'll give it a few minutes. Don't worry about being wrong. I mean, there are wrong answers to this question, but don't worry about being wrong. I had someone for the very first time last week. I was with one of my clients in the DC area and she got it on the first try. I've never had anyone get it on the first try. So, all right. Any guesses? Maybe we're being shy this morning. Well, what this represents, I've had people, there we go. Steve McSwain, somebody's list of what they've learned. These particular numbers, sometimes people say, are these verses in the Bible? Are these things that are associated with maybe like a survey result? I'll reveal to the group here, I'm 39 years old. And so this is actually several different significant moments of ages in my life where I was taught different truths about giving. I share this with you. I'm not going to walk through each one of them, but I share this with you to illustrate the point that giving is a journey. And we often think about giving as an all or nothing proposition. We have to make people givers. Are you a giver or are you not a giver? Are you a certain amount or percentage of a giver, or are you a tither, or do you give above a tithe? It's so much deeper than that. And there are, as we know, scripture is chock full of all different kinds of aspects about our generosity that we'll never fully understand them all. And the different seasons of life that we go through are opportunities when we can learn a new teaching from the Lord. So when I was 8 years old, for example, I grew up on, my family and I, we grew up on a municipal golf course, very, very, very basic golf course in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And this was when we learned for the, I'll say before I say what I learned, my best friend Emily and I used to take golf balls out of the creek and we would wash them and sell them on the 15th tee. And so we would make 50 cents, 25 cents, $1 if it's a Callaway for some of you that golf. And so at 8 years old, we were making a couple $100s every weekend. And my dad quickly realized he needed to teach me that giving needed to be a part of my financial picture. And so that's the first time I learned that, is when I had this golf ball business. Fast forward to age 23, another moment that you'll see on there. One of the things that my dad did teach me that actually, I would say, ended up being a piece of bad theology. My dad is amazing, and we've both since been broken of this theology, but we can all relate to the fact that there's people sometimes that are taught things that aren't biblically accurate. And one of the things that he taught me when I was real young is to save as much as possible. In fact, I was taught to save 50% of every dollar up through my college years. And of course, that gets more difficult, more impossible the older that you get. But that was just my dad. And he grew up in an era where you had to hold on to everything you had, or you might not have anything tomorrow. And so I lived with that theology for quite a while, and it hindered my generosity. I was still a giver. I was a tither. I was above a tither. But there are some people in your churches, they do not struggle with debt. They do not struggle with overspending. Their idol is actually an idol of control. And they are more concerned, and this is how I grew up and how my dad grew up, of controlling their own environment for the future rather than trusting in the Lord. And so you can see on this list at age 23, I learned there was a testimony at the church that I was a part of. I remember it like it was yesterday, of a couple that was giving away a portion of their savings. And I learned that we're not just supposed to honor God with our income. We're supposed to honor him with our entire picture. And I learned that I actually had an unhealthy view of savings. There's no percentage guidance in scripture related to savings, but there's a lot of principled guidance. And there are people in your churches right now, they don't respond to FPU because they don't think they have a debt issue. They don't respond to a budgeting course because they do not have an issue with overspending and they budget just fine. But their challenge is actually a spiritual challenge of the idol of control. And they're not releasing as much as they could to the kingdom of God because they oversave. Last thing I'll mention on this slide is when I turned 29, I purchased my first home. I wasn't married yet and didn't have any children yet. That came shortly thereafter. But one of the biggest things I learned and wrestled with at that age, some of you might relate to this, there's a lot of people in our churches that could relate to this, is that my giving, it was kind of in danger. Anytime you're purchasing something of a large ticket item, it's real easy for that to become suddenly a driver of everything else. And we've probably all been in a conversation with somebody, maybe it wasn't you, maybe it was your friend of a friend who purchased a home and sat at the mortgage closing table and said, okay, honey, we can buy this home, but if we do, there's going to be some things that are going to change around here. And suddenly that home purchase just became a driver of everything else, including your generosity. And I kind of had a kind of a gut check moment with that, and didn't want that to be the case with that purchase. And so really learned about the theology of first. And we're going to talk more about that a little bit later, but that was an incredible learning I had at that point. So what I want to illustrate with this slide is that there's different types of givers on a journey. It doesn't always have to do with their age. Somebody doesn't meet the Lord till later on, but it's a process. And I might encourage each one of you as leaders or administrators or pastors and all that are on this call, church members, if you've never done this exercise before, I'd encourage you to do it, because I think it'll help you be a better leader in generosity. It'll help you to be able to see the multiple layers and the depth of different things that God teaches us about giving through the years. And then how are we creating these moments for other people in our church?
Julie, that is so good. I mean, obviously I've seen this slide before. I knew what those were when you put them up there. I do love the fact that you were strategic in the golf ball business and you were at the 15th tee. See, nobody needs golf balls on the first tee. They've lost a few. And so on the 15th tee, you and Emily were strategic. That was really good. Entrepreneurial spirit right there. But there's so many good points. Exactly. There's so many good things on there. But this last one that you put up there, I think people just miss that. Money isn't our idol. It just reveals what our idols are. Because what we're willing to spend money on is really the thing that becomes the problem, right? I became a Christian in 1983, started becoming a generous Christian in 1985, and then in May of 1987, gave 10% of our gross income for the first time. You know the version of that story, right? And so what I know is that everyone has a journey. That was mine and Nancy's journey. We don't just get, there are a few people that get saved and become generous the next day, but for everybody else, it's a journey. And this is so illustrative of that. And I'll bet for our people who are here today, I bet for every one of them, if after this, they just took 5 or 10 minutes, they could go back and they could pick out moments in their giving story of like, oh yeah, that was an aha. That was an aha. That was an aha. And, one of my ahas happened in 2009 and 2010. 2008 was a great year. 2009 and 10 weren't. And I remember sitting down to write our check. We were writing checks to the church back in 2009, Nancy and I. And, I suggested to Nancy that we were going to reduce our giving in early 2009. And she looked at me and said, So wait, let me get this right. You know how to give when times are good, but you don't know how to give when times are lean.
Mm.
Whoa. Whoa, right? That's a part of the journey, and we all have those. So I love that you embedded this. I was hoping this would be a part of your presentation today because it's so good. Hey, here's what we want to talk about is I've heard you talk about this, and every time you talk about it, I learn something new. This whole idea about inputs and outputs. So let's dive into that.
You bet. So here's the really unfortunate thing about giving. And some of you know this, but maybe you haven't realized it this starkly. The very unfortunate thing about giving is it's one of the areas of our discipleship that is quantifiable. And that is really unfortunate because it causes us, unfortunately, sometimes to focus more on outputs than on inputs. Let me give you an example. I don't think a lot of us go around touting that are quantifying how many times we went to church last year. I don't know. Maybe with COVID you did. Maybe you said, I went to church X number of times. How many times did you go to church? But take COVID out of it for a moment. I don't think most of us fall into an issue of pride based on that. I don't think most of us fall into an issue of pride saying, how many hours did you pray last week? I prayed this many hours. I don't think we fall into issues of pride about that. I do think we fall into issues of pride when we quantify our giving. I don't think we do it out loud. I don't think most of us walk around saying, I just dropped in a triple tithe. How about you? I don't think we do it out loud. I think we do it internally. I think that oftentimes we say, well, this conversation's really great for all these other people. But I mean, I get this. Like I'm probably, gosh, we give, more than we did last year. And I know we're probably give a higher percentage than most of the people in this room or at this church. And while we don't do it out loud, we often justify kind of where we are with the Lord on our giving because it's easy to do because it's quantifiable. Jesus warns us about this specifically in Luke 18. The parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. I think you all know this story. The Pharisee was actually not just quantifying his giving, he also was quantifying his fasting. And so he said, Lord, I fast twice a week. So he was quantifying that. And then he said, and I give a tenth of all I got, of all I have. And so I'm justified before you, right, Lord? Like that's all, those are my outputs. That's all I need to do, right, Lord? And then a tax collector, he looked up to heaven, he beat his breast, he looked up to heaven kind of in a surrendered posture. And he said, Lord, have mercy on me. And those are not his outputs. He's not going to try to say, well, I give this or I fast this. He just has this humble, surrendered posture. Lord, have mercy on me. He desires to please the Lord, but those are not his outputs. Jesus says, this man, the tax collector, went home justified before God, not the Pharisee. Those who humble themselves will be exalted. Those who exalt themselves will be humbled. It's very interesting. It's one of the only times Jesus talks about the tithe. There's one other instance, and he talks about it in a cautionary way. Now, the tithe is still a very relevant biblical principle. It's a helpful guidepost. But the problem is the quantifying of our giving can lead us into output pride. And this is what Jesus is talking about. He's basically saying, I'm not interested in an outward action that is void of an inward motivation. And so as you look here on this slide, that's just what I want to kind of illustrate to us is because our giving, I think most of us would not subscribe to the theology that says the higher amount you give, the closer you are to the Lord. I don't think any of us would say that. There might be some of us that would subscribe to the theology, and it's incorrect, that the larger percentage you give, the closer you are to the Lord, or the more like Christ you must be. That's actually not true either. I think it's incredible that Rick Warren reversed tithes. I think we all know he gives 90%, he lives on 10. It's absolutely incredible. And I'm sure there's many incredible inputs behind that. I know there are. But that's not the goal. That's actually not mathematically possible for most people. And so just because somebody might give 40%, that doesn't mean they're any less closer to the Lord than Rick Warren or any less pleasing the Lord. We actually don't know because we don't know what their inputs are. That's just their outputs. Now, outputs are often derived by inputs, but it's not a direct correlation because what happens when a 2-income household goes to a 1-income household? Because somebody stays home to take care of kids, or maybe a job gets changed and somebody goes to volunteerism. That can become real defeating for someone because when we say that someone is growing in their giving, what do we usually mean? We mean they're growing in their amount, or we mean they're growing in their percentage. Well, what happens when you go from a 2-income household to a 1-income household? Your amount's probably going to change. It's possible even that your percentage changes. Does that mean you're no longer growing in your giving? People get defeated in those seasons because they don't know how to still grow in their giving when their numeric amounts are not increasing. Now, oftentimes there's a correlation between inputs and outputs, or between growing in your giving and your numeric outputs, but it is not a direct correlation. And I think we all know there are seasons of life where that is true. And oftentimes we reduce growing in our giving to amounts and percentages. So when we do that, these two things occur. Jesus cautions us about the pride. And I would say there's probably maybe many of us on the call as very seasoned, faithful Christ followers that would say, I mean, this conversation is great for all my people, but I'm good. Like, I get this. And we are no better than the Pharisee when we say that. When we say, well, here's my outputs. I know I'm giving X percent or X amount. Here's the other side of the equation. There are people in your churches that their amount or their percentage may be so insignificant to them, or they might think it's so small, or they might be in a season of job change or job loss, and they don't engage on their inputs because they feel oppressed by their lower amount of amount or percentage. And both of these two things, output pride and output oppression, prevent us from engaging in the inputs. So the question is, what are these inputs? And the inputs, the pure definition of discipling our givers and discipleship and generosity, discipleship is looking more like Christ. How are we leading our people to look more like Christ? So what are these characteristics that we find, these biblical truths that we find about giving, that we as pastors and leaders can lead people in order so that they might grow in their giving? I'm going to give you a few, and I bet several of you could come up with some. I don't know how interactive we are on the chat today. Some of you might be not as interactive on the chat, but do it in your minds. I'll give you the first few. So the first one is the theology of first. Now, here's what's interesting about this one. I think a lot of us would say, oh, well, yeah, it's the first check I write every month is my giving check, or the first auto draft that comes out. I give first. And most people would be giving first in order. And there's a difference in giving first in order versus first in priority. You might be giving first in priority if it's the first check or the first auto draft that comes out, but you might not. See, first in order is very much 1 Corinthians 16. Set aside a sum at the first part of every week to be honoring to the Lord. So that's good. First in order is good. That is biblical. That is right. First in priority is a little deeper. First in priority, Cain and Abel, Genesis 4. Some of you know the story. So Abel tended livestock and Cain tended fields. Abel gave the first and the fattest, the first and the best of his livestock, not knowing what that would happen to the rest of the livestock. By the way, not knowing if they would get diseased, not knowing if they would get stolen. He gave the first and the best to the Lord. Cain, by contrast, waited. Most translations say the phrase, over the course of time. So not first, waited till the harvest had been produced. In our modern day context, this might be a December giver, although it is not our position to judge. It's not, because our December givers could be giving first before the next year. But Cain waited to see his harvest that had been produced. And then it says he gave God some. Now, here's the interesting thing. We don't know if that sum was actually worth a larger amount than Abel's livestock. We don't know the answer to that. It doesn't tell us. We don't know if that sum was a larger percentage. It might have been half of the field. We don't know that. It may have been a larger percentage than Abel's. We don't know. Here's what we do know. One gave first, one gave leftover, one gave after he had seen what had been produced. And verse 5 in Genesis 4 says, the Lord rejected, or some nicer translations say, did not look with favor upon Cain's gift, and looked with favor upon Abel's gift. So here's what's challenging is I know that many of us, we might approach a season of giving and say, I'm on commission, or my situation is so uncertain and I don't know if I can commit to giving. I'm going to give a certain percentage of my situation. But here's the thing. There's things in our life. If you go to buy your house and you say, I'm on commission, or I don't really know like what my life's going to look like. Can I just give you 8% of whatever comes in? They would say, you can't buy this house. The only way you can buy this house is if you commit to an amount, a priority. They want it to be a priority for you. Why? So that it's a driver, so that it will actually drive other decisions in your life. That if your situation goes south, that house is going to get paid first. And if we're really honest, most people, Their giving isn't their driver. Their giving is a product of other decisions. Their giving might even be a really large amount. It might be a really large percentage. But if they're really honest, there are other priorities in their life that would be above it. And I'm going to go to Colossians 1 to help illustrate this. Many of you know Colossians 1 is the preeminence of Christ. The Apostle Paul wrote this letter to the church at Colossae in about 90 AD. Most scholars think it was written about 90 AD. And what was happening in 90 AD is like the telephone game, basically, because Jesus had walked on the earth 90 years ago. And it was an opportunity where there were many people that had not personally witnessed him and others that had heard secondhand about his teachings. And so there was a lot of heresy going on. And Paul wrote Colossians 1 to refute that heresy. And so he says, let me just tell you who Jesus is. He says, because there was a lot of heresy going on that Jesus was not the Son of God and he wasn't the way to the Father. He says, he's the image of the invisible God. He's the firstborn over all creation. All things have been created by him, to him, through him, for him, all the prepositions you want to use. He is before all things. All things have been reconciled. He's the head of the body of the church. All things have been reconciled to him through his blood shed on the cross. It's all about the gospel. He's before all things. If many of us are honest, all things are by our house, to our house, through our house, and for our house payment. So others of us, all things are by our kids, to our kids, through our kids, and for our kids. And decisions that we make, whether it's we can send this kid to this college, but if we do, that's going to change our picture. We can buy this car, but if we do, that's going to change our picture. We can buy this house, but if we do, anytime if you've ever said that, well, we can make this decision, but if we do, some things are going to have to change. That thing just became a driver. It just became first. And most people will approach a season of giving at your church and they will say, honey, what can we afford to give to the church? We need to start giving to the church. What can we afford to give to the church in this campaign? We need to give more. That question, what can we afford to give, is a Cain question, not an Abel question, because the rest of that sentence, what can we afford to give, in light of everything we're already committed to? That is a leftover question. The right question is, Lord, you know me, you know my family, you know my situation. What would represent first and best for us? What would be so first that it would represent you are before all things, then all things are by you, to you, through you, and for you, that my giving would drive my spending, it would drive my saving, not the other way around. Most people in our churches, they're giving. It might even be a really generous percentage. It might be a really generous amount, but it's being driven by other financial decisions that they've made. I'll stop preaching. But I say that right there to say that this is one example of an input. And I'm not going to go as deep on some of these others, but I'll mention them to you. There are these biblical principles in scripture that when we teach on them, we are communicating to people in a way that changes how they give. It changes their outputs, because these inputs maybe haven't been taught to them in such a way. Sometimes we only teach the outputs. Just tithe, just try it, just do it. Just give more, just go to a higher percentage. And we're focusing on the outputs, or we're focusing on the ways to give. Do online recurring giving. It'll help you be more disciplined. You won't even have to think about it. Is that the goal? The goal is to look more like Christ. The goal is to have an eternal perspective that our stuff is not our own, and that it's not just about what God will give us, but it's like, how do we steward our house? How are we stewarding all the things he's already given us? It's about trust. It's about trusting in his provision and not our own. It's about surrendering, just like we do in baptism. We surrender our lives to the lordship of Christ and we yield to his leading in our life. It's not about a bottom up, I'm going to cut my cable, I'm going to cut my Starbucks theology. It's a top down, fully surrendered, everything I have is his, because he's the owner and I'm the manager.
You know, I think, Julie, that's so rich and so much to peel back there. And, you know, if I had to summarize that, I've heard you do this before, and it's like, our giving should drive our living, not the other way around, right? And that the way that we tend to do it is our living drives our giving, but our giving should drive our living. And that's the idea of first. And it's such a good point. I mean, when you unpack that for us the first time, I had thought about that, but not as thoroughly as you presented it. It's just so good. The eternal perspective, the trust, the surrender. I mean, I love all of that. So here's what we know. Let's kind of transition to a third idea for you to talk about. Oh, actually, I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, we were just going to give you a
Go
few
through
things
these.
here. No, it's fine. It's totally great, Jim. We were just going to give you a few of these here with some scripture references, and Christy will put
Perfect.
these obviously too in your notes. But there's probably 25 different ones, and a lot of you I know are very theologically astute. So if we had a really good interactive chat bar, I would ask you to name a few. In fact, I'll go ahead and do it if anybody wants to put anything in the chat bar. But that being said, there are so many theological inputs, so many biblical truths that help guide our giving. And we as pastors and leaders, this is how we need to be communicating with our givers, not worrying about different words or phrases that we use and let's drive them to online giving, let's drive them to text giving. Those are secondary to these primary teachings that we need to be doing for our people.
Well, and I think in terms of that, Julie, the other idea here is that our giving has the power to transform us in a way that almost nothing else in life can. You know, I remember the first time I heard Pastor Robert Morris say, he said, your giving has the power to drive greed and selfishness out of your life like nothing else can. That's what we're talking about here, is the inputs are really what really take place, and then the outputs come from that. I mean, in my story about 2009, truth of the matter is, Julie, even with the reduced dollar amount, the percentage that we would have been giving would have been much higher. And I tried to legitimize that with Nancy, and she just looked me in the eye and said, you got a problem giving when times are lean. And I was like, whoa. That was the issue. That was the input. That was the input for me, you know, and that was a transformative moment there. So the idea is that in Journeys, there's a place where people are currently, a place that's maybe a hopeful place down the road somewhere. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you think about, and there's a lot of different, words we could use here to describe maybe people like the current condition of our givers and then where we're looking to transition them to. So these are some words we've chosen, but there's different words. You might come up with 5 different words. You might want to do the 5 R's. You might want to do the 3 P's. But whatever that is, these are some types of givers that maybe where their current condition is and how we want to disciple them into this hopeful future for themselves as disciples. And so the first one is obviously the non-giver. There are people in all of our churches, it's a larger amount than we want to, larger amount of people that we want to admit that are actually non-givers. And some of the most powerful things you can do through worship moments, through new member classes, through new attender classes, is actually discipling people into new givers. When was the last time during a worship service that you actually said, you know what, last month at ABC Church, we had 72 first-time givers. Can we just celebrate that? I just want to invite you. Maybe you've never taken that step of becoming a new giver before and trusting God. So many of us don't trust in God's provision for our lives. And here at ABC Church, we don't have to give, we get to give. It's a privilege to give, and we give with cheerfulness and joy. And I want to invite you, if you haven't yet started that giving journey, would you start it today? You could start it right now. We invite you to do that and become a new giver when you're ready. So we celebrate those new givers. We talk about the theology behind maybe why we'd want to become that. I use the theology of trust right there as an input to talk through that. And we help them to see the place where they are and the hopeful future where we might want them to be. The next one is the sporadic giver. Again, this is, more families at our churches, more households and individuals than we would want to admit. And many of them, we seek to make them a consistent giver, sometimes by using a tool. I think I hear in a lot of churches, become consistent through using our online giving recurring tool. It's very easy. You can text 77977 to this. And that's great. And I would say if someone is already discipled, then that is a great tool for them. If they already know the why and the motivation behind why they want to set up for a subscription to your church, which is why they might think of that. If they're not discipled, it might just feel like a Netflix. But if many of them are sporadic givers, not because they don't know about your online platform, you talk about it every week. They're sporadic givers because they don't understand the theology behind why they want to become consistent. When the Apostle Paul talks in 2 Corinthians 8 about see to it that you too, he's talking to the churches or to the church at Corinth after he's just talked about the story of the churches at Macedonia and how they gave out of their poverty. And it welled up in extreme joy and generosity. And he says in verse 7 of 2 Corinthians chapter 8, see to it that you too excel in this grace of giving. Just like you excel in knowledge and in all wisdom and in earnestness, see to it that you too excel in this grace of giving. 1 Corinthians 16, talking about setting aside every week something for the Lord. And so help people to understand it's not just because we want to get them on a recurring system because it'll help us plan our budget better as a church. That's not a reason. That is not a discipleship reason. That might be a practical church business reason. It's not a discipleship reason. So a lot of your people, they keep hearing that message every week, and you're wondering why they're not going online and giving. That's a helpful tool for them. I will say, I've still got really hip, cool churches that use envelopes. And so maybe envelopes are your jam. And while probably more people are digital than others, especially in the age we're in, the end all be all isn't online. The end all be all is consistency. And so teaching that discipleship of the discipline of giving is what we're going after. The third one I'll mention, we talked about this with the theology of first, is the leftover giver. There are more people in our church than we probably even realize. That maybe there's some of us even on this call after hearing that teaching today would say, do I give as a result of my spending and saving? Or do I give first and my spending and saving follows? And not first in order, but first in priority. And a really key revealer, like Jim said, is in times of hardship. Who gets paid first? Who gets paid first? And for many people, it's your house, it's things for your kids, it might be your cell phone. And those payments are not going down in a time of hardship, but your giving might if it's not a priority for you. And so it's a gut check challenge to think through, is my giving a product of my spending and my saving, or is it a driver? Is it truly something that I prioritize because he is before all things are by him, to him, through him, and for him. Fourth one is a complacent giver. I think we, I don't know, I'll say sometimes some of our most faithful Christ followers, sometimes it might not be output pride, but it could be output complacency. Maybe it doesn't go all the way to the Pharisaical output pride, but we often can get complacent. It's why it's really healthy for churches to do giving initiatives every so often. Pastor friend of mine in North Carolina always says, I like to do it about every 2 to 3 years because my people, just like a car, they need realignment. And they need to kind of be out of their complacency, because some of my most faithful, mature Christ followers get into a rut. And I don't know if any of us are guilty of this, but how many times has auto draft become autopilot? When was the last time that you really thought about consciously the why behind why you're giving? And maybe you're growing in your amount, but are you really growing in your understanding of how Christ is calling you to give? And so we really want to transition these complacent givers to surrendered givers, to those people, a surrendered giver who, just like when we become baptized, we surrender our lives to the Lordship of Christ. A surrendered giver, very similarly, is understanding the yieldings and the promptings of the Lord. And they're so step in step communing with the Lord. There's nothing complacent about it. They're responsive to his leadings. They understand when the Lord is speaking to them. They change their lifestyle when God prompts them to, and there's nothing autopilot about it. The fifth and final one that I'll share is an earthly giver to an eternal giver. Randy Alcorn, I know all of you probably know Randy Alcorn, has a lot to say about this subject. If you're looking for some great resources on this, obviously, many of you probably read The Treasure Principle. It's an easy read, but it's packed full of incredible biblical truth. The book that's influenced me the most outside of the Bible would be Randy Alcorn's other book. It's a little thicker. He's written several, but Money, Possessions, and Eternity. And this notion of someone going from an earthly giver to an eternal giver, there are many people in our churches, they're quite generous. They're quite philanthropic. They give a really large amount, maybe a really big percentage, and we treat them as such. We just pat them on the back, and we don't want that gravy train to end. And we're so grateful for them, and they get, this kind of dinner or whatever. And again, no James 2 violations, but sometimes we do kind of over celebrate people that might be giving large amounts or large percentages, which without actually hearing their story and their motivations behind why they give. And some even very large, high capacity givers may never have really been challenged on the theology of eternal perspective, on seeing their entire life and everything that they have as a tool for the Lord, on seeing their home actually as an asset for the Lord. See, there's nothing wrong with having a home, and there's nothing wrong with having a large home. The question is, are you honoring God in your home? The Apostle Paul says in 1 Timothy 6, teach those who are rich in this present age, and that's all of us in the US, by the way, not to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides for all things for our enjoyment. In doing so, you'll lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, take hold of the life that is truly life. In the sandwich I missed, teach them to be generous and willing to share. So one of the things I want to pull out from that is that Paul does not say not to have wealth. He doesn't say that. Jesus doesn't either. They just caution you about how dangerous it is if your rightful mind isn't in it, if you put your hope in it. Jesus talks about how you don't want to build barns for your stuff, the building of bigger barns. And if you store up too much here on earth and have an earthly perspective, what if your life might be demanded from you tonight? And what did you do with all these things? If we see each one of our assets, our home, our going out to eat budget, our vehicles, not as our own, but as the Lord's, that gives us the perspective of an eternal giver, not of an earthly one.
So good, Julie. And I love this third verse that you put up there last. You want to go ahead and go over that, and then we'll transition to a few Q questions here.
That's perfect. This last passage comes out of Paul's letter to the church at Philippi. And some of you know this, but the church at Philippi, they were part of the region of Macedonia. So when Paul talks about the Macedonians, that was the church at Philippi, church at Thessalonica, and the church at Berea. And this was a very generous church that did go through a season of poverty. They were not always characterized by poverty, but they did go through a season that Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians 8. But in this particular passage, Paul is admonishing them for how they gave, but he's saying that it's not their giving that is what mattered. It's the heart behind their giving. I'll read this passage to us. As you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, when I set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you only. For even when I was in Thessalonica, you sent me aid more than once when I was in need. It's not that I desire your gifts, though. What I desire is that more be credited to your account. I've received full payment. I have more than enough. I'm amply supplied. Now that I've received from Epaphroditus the gifts that you sent, they are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice pleasing to the Lord. And my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. Verse 17 is so key there. It's not that I desire your gifts. It's that I desire that more be credited to your account with the Lord. And so even we as pastors and leaders, I just want to encourage you that the giving to, the output is not as important as the giving from. Now, we don't ever want to say it's not about the money, it's about the heart. Don't ever say that, because it's about both. That's as bad as if I said, it doesn't matter if you cheat on your spouse, as long as your heart is right. No, it matters. It matters. You're not supposed to cheat on your spouse. But out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks and the body behaves. So your heart needs to be right. And that's my job as your pastor. If we're pastoring someone through an adulterous situation, I'm not talking about their behavior. I'm talking about the motivation behind their behavior. That's how I'm going to help them to change. That's how I'm going to help them to see what Christ desires for them. And the same is true of our giving. Don't ever say it's not about the money, it's about the heart. It's about both, because one flows to the other. So that amount might not mean anything to anybody else, but it'll mean a lot to you as the giver, and it'll mean a lot to the Lord because he knows what it represents. And our role as pastors and leaders, we can't control the output, but you bet we can help lead people and grow people in their giving through their inputs.
So good, Julie. So good right there. Thank you. And I love, you know how much I love Philippians 4:17 and how I just stumbled on the reality of what that's saying. It's been right in front of your face for all these years. And then I paused and said, I mean, we'll hear our churches say, hey, it's not what I want from you, it's what I want for you. But, and I don't have anybody in mind, but there are lots of churches that say that and then do the exact opposite. And that's where we get a lot of this pushback from our people that said they're smart enough to figure out that what you're saying here is not in alignment with what you're doing over here. And that's harmful to the church. I believe, this is Jim, that Philippians 4:17, if all of our churches could adopt that perspective for giving and the theology of giving in their church, it would be the biggest game changer that we could find. There's other things, but that would be the biggest game changer because it truly does speak to the from and not the to. And if we tend to this will take care of itself. You know that, and I know that. So good stuff. Okay. I do on the idea of outputs. This is Robert Morris, which if any of you have read The Blessed Life, you know, that's his life message. A couple of years ago, he was giving a talk at a luncheon. I've never heard him say this anywhere but where before. He was telling his dad how many cars he'd given away. And I think it was like 15. And I may have the number wrong, but he was telling his dad. So he was talking about outputs, right? He was talking about outputs. And so his dad said, well, yeah, I think I'd probably given away 15, maybe more houses. Robert said, I never counted how many cars I've given away. I had no idea how many cars I've given, because that's his thing. If you read Blessed Life, that's one of the things he does very regularly. But his dad said 15 houses. Robert, so we can get in trouble over here with outputs, even somebody like Robert. And he told that story on himself that day. It was so revealing about, just kind of the heart behind everything. Hey, in the registrations, while you all are putting your Q&A up there, I don't see any up there yet, but some of you sent questions in with your registration. And there's two of you sent kind of the same question. It's worded a little bit differently. And it's the idea, Julie, of developing generosity strategy among age groups in the church. So one person wrote, how do we develop long-term generosity language for the church? In other words, how to cultivate and teach healthy generosity patterns for all age groups in our church family. Another person wrote it a little bit differently, but pretty much the same idea. Regarding giver communication, do you consider the different age groups? How do you communicate to different ages? And specifically, how do you reach givers under 40? Speak to that idea for us.
Yeah, that's great. Well, first of all, I will mention, I talked a little bit about when I was 8 years old, that's whenever I learned to give for the very first time. Many kids learn it before that if their church is doing a good job discipling their kids. So if your church is not receiving an offering in your kids ministry area, for those of you that do kind of have a separate kids discipleship, I know some of you might have kids in the service, in the main service, but I think most maybe do have kind of a separate area for child discipleship. If you're not receiving an offering in there, I really want to encourage you to do that. And of course, doing that, just like anything that you're doing with child discipleship, requires great parent equipping. And so for birth through 5th grade, I really want to encourage you. There's some incredible resources out there for actual parent classes. Smart Money, Smart Kids from the Ramsey organization is a wonderful tool. It's a 6-week course that many churches have run. It's got a great video curriculum to it. Dave Ramsey's daughter, actually, Rachel, is the one who teaches it. She does a great job. And it's for parents of kids birth through, it actually goes through high school, so it's relevant to student ministry as well. Another really incredible resource from the Good Sense movement that came out of Willow Creek is the Raising Financially Freed Up Kids. And actually there's a church out of Indianapolis area, or actually it's out of somewhere in that area, Ohio. It's out of Ohio, Crossroads. They actually just redid some of that curriculum, made some updated videos, and it's incredible. Raising Financially Freed Up Kids. Our church back in Chicago did that course for several years. And both of them are courses for parents to help disciple their kids in giving. So not only what we do on Sunday mornings or on weekends or throughout the week, but also for parent equipping. There's also some great tools. I actually had this tool when I was growing up. After I turned 8 years old, I had a Give, Save, Live box. And so there's some great vendors out there. We even have a couple that we refer to our clients who will create a branded Give, Save, Live box for your church that you could give out to parents. And then we have kids, bring that back and learn about giving at home. And then they bring their give to church. But to have an intentional time where they are bringing their offering, most elementary and preschool are still current analog currency, I'll say. I think there are some families, maybe they're pretty savvy with 4th and 5th grade digital giving, but I think it's more going to be in middle school and high school where the mode of giving might be different. Now, that's what I'll say to any youth pastors out there, or any pastors that are asking this question about kind of those in middle school and high school. One of the biggest hindrances why we don't see a lot of giving from those ages, there's 2 things. One is lack of teaching. We're not teaching it in their environments. So it's not a frequent topic like it is for the adults because we don't feel like we have the need, but we have the need to disciple them. The second thing is a lack of a clear mode. So we need to understand in each one of our churches, how are our middle schooler and high schoolers receiving their currency? Do a lot of them get paid from Venmo? Do they get paid from Cash App? Are they getting paid actual cash from babysitting or from lawn mowing? It's probably a combination of that. And so if you do still have students with cash, you need to provide giving envelopes. If you're wanting them to start learning to give in a trackable way, you need to have envelopes because they do not have a check. They don't have a credit card. They have cash. So as archaic as it sounds, you need student ministry envelopes. But there are some that do get their compensation for jobs or for odd jobs through Venmo or Cash App. And so a great resource we recommend to our churches is a resource called Greenlight. It's actually, some of you might know about it. It's a secular resource, but it has a charitable component. And Greenlight is actually, it's a debit card that has an attached app where parents can help teach their kids about budgeting, but also about giving. There is a charitable component on there. So a lot of our churches use Greenlight for some parent equipping. It's like a digital version of a Give, Save, Live box. So Give, Save, Live box works awesome for the colors and everything for elementary and even preschool. But for a Greenlight's a great digital version of that when you get a little bit older. I also sensed, because of the under 40 comment, that you might be asking about, millennials or Gen Z or Gen X or all those. I would say this. I think one of the biggest travesties of our time in church giving is is sometimes people acquiescing to the myth that millennials only want to give to I'll say like humanitarian causes like Charity Water, World Relief, World Vision. I'm not saying that that's not true, but we can't acquiesce to that. We have to lead this next generation to learn about giving to the local church. And many of them haven't learned that. And so we as churches try to add a little bit of Charity Water here, a little bit of World Vision, a little bit of compassion to try to make our budgets more attractive to millennials giving to them. And that, while you should be doing those things and giving outside your church because you believe in those things, not because you're trying to attract more givers, that's not the right motivation. Actually, our millennials and even maybe some folks that might be more designated giving oriented should be discipled and taught about the value of giving towards the local church, and that the local church is the bride of Christ, and that there's so many incredible things the Lord does by raising up people that start those organizations and raising up people that serve in those organizations that would even ever think up those organizations. And so the local church is the catalyst, it's the engine. And if the local church isn't healthy, strong, vibrant, and growing, then those organizations don't happen to the degree that they should and that they could. So that's my little soapbox about that.
Well said, Julie. You covered that extremely well. Here's one that I think is a relevant topic that I listen to people, pastors, they're like, I don't even know how many people we still got with us here. So here's the question. We actually do, because when they give, we sort of know they're with us. So that's one of the indicators. But here's the question. How do we re-engage people/givers who may have become disconnected during this last year? How can we increase giving participation? Great question.
Sorry, I was muted. That is a big question. Man, with so many layers, the whole, that's like the $1 million question right now, is just re-engaging people, period. So this is probably part of a larger conversation about what your church is doing just to get people re-engaged. And I do know, man, there's probably a variety of philosophies here, even on this call, about in-person versus digital engagement. And so I don't want to try to go too much in the weeds on that, except to say that giving engagement is going to flow from those things. And so, I'll just reveal my hand. I think that, those people that don't have a medical reason why they can't come to church, or that don't have a reason, geographic reason why they can't come to your church in person, or some type of a social anxiety reason, they should be at your church in person. And as much as possible, offering engagement opportunities for them, even if they're in smaller groups or whatever, to re-engage back with your church, I think is essential. I know we very much value those that are worshiping from out of state, online, or those that have a medical issue or some other things, with providing these online opportunities for them. But I think we all know there's just a sea of people during this season. It's not about a medical issue. It's not about that they're out of area. It's about that they've fallen into poor habits. And these poor habits are them no longer engaging in church in person, and they very much could for no medical hindrance at all. So I think that's really a big ticket, is trying to as much face-to-face engagement as we can. And for those that are joining digitally, doing some Zoom huddles. I've got a lot of pastors that started doing that in COVID, and some of them have kept doing it. Some Zoom huddles with different pockets of givers throughout the year. Some of them calls it Pastor's Huddle, and they do one of them a month, and they just gather 10 to 15 different households on Zoom and kind of update them on the church and ask them some questions. And it's a great way, whether you're doing that on Zoom or even if you're able to do it in person, to continue connecting with your people. So I know that's not a really full answer. It's just such part of a larger complex question about engagement right now.
Yeah, I think I heard a couple of things in there, Julie. One of them is that it's a discipleship issue. They need to be well discipled in the value and reason for being a part of the physically gathered church. There's the habit reason. We got into the habit of being able to sit at home. And so we've kind of, hey, we got to get back in this habit. It's easier for, especially if you have a family, to not have to get everybody ready and just go to the family room and watch church, assuming you're going to do that. But it's a big idea. You're going to have to be creative. I heard you say you're going to have to be creative. You're not going to be able to do things that you've always done and expect people to come back. You're going to have to give them reasons to engage, and then add in this discipleship component of just teaching them, the value of church. Such a good, and you're right. It's a huge topic. Every pastor I talk to, this is kind of front of mind. I have to kind of listen to that one, and then we're like, okay, well, let's talk about this other stuff too. So, all right, here's where we've got one that is with communication. First-time donors. How do you make first-time donors feel that their gift is truly appreciated, no matter the amount? How do you keep your messages, requests, and appreciation from getting stale? Let's just go to this whole idea of first-time giver communication, or maybe even second-time giver communication. Talk about that, Julie.
Yeah, so I think as much as possible, and I know I mentioned earlier things that you can do through your offering moment in the service. And by the way, I'll say this, I know so many people, especially during COVID, stopped passing a bucket or a bag and all those things. And that's completely fine. Whatever your church is doing on that, there's a lot of reasons to do it or to not do it, depending on your church context. But I will say this, regardless if you pass anything or not in the service, or if you have a giving box or whatever, you need to have a giving moment every single week. And that is a powerful time when we can be teaching these inputs, when we can be sharing stories, when we can be challenging and inviting people to next steps. And that's one of our best audiences of people that are first-time givers that can become second-time givers, is in that very, very, very broad environment. The other one is through your assimilation process. And I know that probably several of you have, all of you have different assimilation processes. Maybe you've got like a growth track where you've got week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, whenever you're new. Maybe you have a membership class that's a couple weeks long. Maybe you have like a pizza with a pastor welcome lunch that you do. And then after that, you go to a discover class. But whatever your assimilation process is, sometimes we really do shortchange giving in those processes. And it's interesting when we go on site to churches, sometimes we do this thing called a generosity audit, where we will just kind of like evaluate all your systems and processes of generosity and see what you're doing and where the opportunities for growth are. And one of the things we always find is when we ask this question, like, so what's being taught in the new member opportunities? And often it's very little about giving. And so we ask the question, how are you expecting your people to be onboarded to giving? If we're not teaching it, like where is that going to happen? Where's the magical light bulb going to happen outside of maybe a capital campaign where you have this focused time of a lot of teaching? How's it going to happen on a regular basis? Because most of you probably have new people coming in every single week, or at least every single month. And so where is that going to happen? If it's not happening through a giving moment, if it's not happening through an assimilation process, where is it happening? And that's why in so many of our churches, we have droves and droves, sometimes half. The average is that half of the people in a church do not give. That's the average. Some are worse than that. Some are better than that. But that's because of a lot of this lack of intentionality for converting the non-giver to a new giver. Similar to that, the question I know also about first-time giver to second-time giver, a lot of that goes back to that slide about sporadic to consistent, and that all we often talk about is like the modes and the ways to give and the kind of the mechanics of, here's our website, text this to this. You can, you'll get a free coffee today in the coffee shop if you sign up for online giving. And while all that's fine, and it works with people that are already discipled and that already understand why they should be doing that, it doesn't work with people that are more sporadic. And so that intentional teaching, both through the venue of giving moments in the worship service, but also through venues, not just of a membership class, but of group leader training. Like, do our small group leaders, would they understand what we believe about giving as a church? Does it ever come up in a group? If someone in a group were to ask their leader, hey, how do you think about your giving? Are you on autopilot? Do you change your giving amount every year? If someone were to ever ask a small group leader that question, what would they say? Are we confident that all of our small group leaders even give at all? Do we know that information? Do we care about that information? Because all of this discipleship is happening outside of the Sunday service, and oftentimes we're not being intentional. And those are the things that can convert a first-time giver to a second-time giver to somebody who begins to give consistently.
So good, Julie. I love that. You really covered a lot of ground there. And this whole idea of, our churches will say to you and to me, well, I don't want to be talking about, giving every Sunday. Well, you're already doing it. I mean, I hope you're doing it when you have a giving moment. Whatever you do, you've got to have a giving moment. Well, yeah, we are doing that, but that's just kind of when we, when we pass the baskets or the buckets or whatever we do. And it's like, well, wait a second. You're not setting that up with some teaching or, so it's your 52 times a year, you can be teaching these little tiny nuggets that over time just build up and you're building discipleship in there. And I think what I've heard you say throughout this too, one of the observations I would make is that giving and generosity needs to flow like a thread through everything in the church. It can't be siloed anywhere. Even if you have a generosity pastor, that person is just there to equip and empower other people to do it. You have to weave it through the youth ministry, the kids ministry, the small groups ministry. Every ministry ought to have some component of generosity embedded in there. And that's a big thought. That's a really big idea for most, I think, of our attenders here to think about. So, hey, Julie, we are at the witching hour. And I want to personally say to you, we're about an hour into this, and you are just so good at putting this stuff out here. The way that you articulate it, I grabbed a couple of thoughts today that I haven't heard. You probably said them, and I was writing notes and didn't hear them, so I scribbled a couple of new notes down here today. I'm confident that our attendees grabbed a lot of notes today, and if you didn't get all the notes, then the good news is you've got the recording and you can play it back again and you can get at that. So thank you for taking time out of your day to be here with us. It means a lot. I knew when we did this generosity workshop, there had to be at least one session that had you in it, and this topic had your name written all over it. I think everybody understands why now. So thank you for that. Christy, I'm going to pitch it back to you. I think you've got maybe a few things to clean up here at the end.
Yes, I do. Well, thank you both. Julie, that was amazing. This is one of my favorite talks that I've heard you do, and I was happy to hear it again. Jim, you're great. And thank you for playing host today. I really appreciate it. So thank you to everyone who joined us. This was an awesome hour and 4 minutes. And like I said, you'll be getting a recording of the workshop as well as Julie's slides so that you can kind of go through them. And so that will be coming to you tomorrow. So, here at Generis, we love partnering with church leaders to help them understand the types of givers in their church, how to effectively communicate with them, and just help them understand the health of their giving and stewardship culture. So if we could help you with that, we would be honored to do so. I am actually going to do two things at once and drop just some links in the chat so that you can go ahead and get connected with Generis, drop a line to Jim or Julie, as well as to sign up for our upcoming 2 workshops. We have 2 left in the series. The next one is on July 21st with Brad Leeper and John Bennett, and they're going to be talking about the art of activating those non-givers in your church. So that's going to be a great conversation. And just a soft promo to our State of Generosity Roundtable, which will be happening on August 24th. All eyes are on a year-end giving, so we're working towards that, and that workshop will be right in line with that. So thank you everyone for joining us. This was an amazing, amazing session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christy.